Hello everyone, I'm Lynn with Psychic Focus at psychicfocus.blogspot.com, and today I wanted to talk about cryptids and crawlers. And someone was nice enough to share a little story about their experiences and then wanting to know my take on what I think about it. So I'll go ahead and get started and I'll read this to you. It says, I live in a very rural area of Missouri. I have one neighbor within a half mile of my home. And there's easily 10,000 plus acres in a few miles radius of me that is completely unoccupied, probably hasn't had a human explorer in 100 years. A lot of areas, very hilly forest, full of caves, lakes, and the valleys and ravines. During my time here, I've witnessed two different cryptids. The first one you already talked about a few weeks ago, the dogmen. I had a couple sightings of them 2 to 3 years ago, and I kind of blew this off as my mind playing tricks on me until I had 2 life-threatening encounters with them. I actually talk about those on a YouTube series known as Dogman Encounters, and I put a link on my blog to that because you all might find this interesting and want to explore that a little deeper, so feel free to check that out. Back to the question. It says, my questions are related to the other one that I've seen, crawlers. And that was a new term for me. I had my first crawler sighting in the early mid-90s. I mentioned my first sighting and my best visual encounter with them at the beginning of the Dogman interview above. Back in the 90s, we had something get into our chicken coop at night that was slaughtering chickens. It also ended up getting a goat as well. It wasn't eating them, just straight up ripping them to shreds and leaving them on the ground outside the coop. My parents thought it was dogs, but was getting in by tearing the chicken wire apart in the top corner of the wire caged yard about 5 feet off the ground. I made my case with them that no dog would do that, and if they wanted in, they'd probably just dig under the wire. So then they started to think it was a raccoon, which once again made no sense to me. That was until I caught the crawler red-handed one night, coming home late, and I pulled into my normal parking lot. My headlights shined directly onto the chicken coop where a golem from Lord of the Ring-like creature was on the roof. Had very pale white, almost translucent skin, was hairless, dark sunken eyes, very thin. You could see its bone structure, ribs, almost no nose. It hissed, it growled at us until I started flashing my brights at it, laying on the air horn in my truck. After a minute or so, it jumped off toward the woods. This was my best look at it. Could you imagine pulling in and seeing that? Over a decade later, had another close sighting late at night. I was playing video games in my bedroom like 1, 2 a.m. only to hear a scream that sounded like the mix of a girl and a pig squeal in my window a few feet away. I looked over and I saw a crawler with its face pressed against the window screen, and I fell over in my desk chair, which I guess spooked it away from the window, giving me a chance to run over and close my window and blind as fast as I could. I had other sightings and signs of them over the years, but those were my 2 best sightings. I was hoping you could look into these things for me. I've been trying to learn about them for decades now. Again, another couple links within the narrated portion here. It says, from what they've gathered in my studies over the years, it's probably cave dwellers. Most sightings seem to be around places that have cave systems or large abandoned sewer systems nearby. They seem to prefer to eat dead stuff, often slaughtering things and then coming back to eat them. They're incredibly good climbers, can move very fast and quietly, and seem to be able to move through tight spaces. I also came across a story from some soldiers who encountered these things in the Mideast. They said they were spying on an insurgent camp in the middle of the night in the mountain when they witnessed several of these things come out of nearby caves and make their way to the camp where they slaughtered everyone. The soldiers said that they could see them on the night vision, but they didn't show up on the infrared heat vision. I also wondered if the old world stories of ghouls were actually talking about these things. If you get anything for me about these, I'd love to hear it. So you can see why this grabbed my attention. That was so well narrated, the story and the description. I wanted to know more because I had not heard this terminology of cryptids and crawlers. I have heard about dogmen, didn't know he was called a cryptid, but the crawler thing really threw me. So when I focused on these crawlers, I did get a strong reptilian connection. And they look to be part of the reptilian ET race, and they live underground. So I understand the whole cave aspect. They carry a low vibration, they're very primal beings. And I see them coming out at night because their eyes cannot take in that much light. They're so used to being underground that their eyes have developed to see in very low light, and they're also very pale due to their generations of evolutions in the ground or underground. I get that they're starting to come up to the surface more and more due to food shortages. It used to be they were more like slaves to the underground bases, and they were fed and they were cared for in exchange for working and mining natural resources. Some bases feel like they've been abandoned. The resources have been, exhausted and extracted where it's at in certain areas. So these bases have relocated, and the crawlers were left behind to fend for themselves. They do not feel friendly. They lack many emotions and feelings that humans possess. Imagine them as sociopaths from the underground that are in pure survival mode because they're starving. These are not beings to approach or interact with, so be cautious and keep your distance. Having said that, and moving forward, I get that these aliens that are doing this are really low vibe ET. Super strong reptilian connection to the cryptids. It all feels like this is all interrelated. And I got that they lived underground for centuries and they're making their way to the surface more and more often. And it appears that these low vibe beings are also intellectually inferior to their reptilian masters, I guess, for lack of a better descriptor of how the dynamic of that structure, that social structure is set up. So you have these reptilian overlord type beings, and then you have these lower vibe aliens, still affiliated with the ETs, but just very almost like a very primitive form of them. And it looks as though these reptilian connected ETs were somewhat abandoned, leaving them to fend for themselves. So it looks like the reptilians, they use these beings to complete tasks, mine precious metals, resources, and all basically their dirty work, anything that they needed done. And once an area became mined and resources were depleted, the reptilians would leave and then leave these beings behind. With little in the way of resources to survive, the cryptids have been coming to the surface to feed. So it's more like this abandonment of this group, and they're underground and they're starving and they're in this survival mode. And when you think about it, and they're a very primitive being anyway, they're very low vibe. So you put some basic need that needs to be met, like food, on their radar, and that's what they're doing. That's all they can focus on. And as I mentioned in my earlier reading, they used to be underground and they've evolved within that environment. So bright light or even the heat of the sun isn't something that they can tolerate very easily. And so that's why they do their hunting mainly at night. It's not because they're trying to be elusive and hide or be scary, that kind of thing. It's more like they don't have tolerance during the day, and their comfort zone and their ease to hunt is at night. And then I saw these cryptids mainly receiving nourishment from the animal's blood, and it looked like the iron in the blood was something that they craved. That's what they specifically needed, that type of a mineral. It looks like they have an appendage under their tongue that they can protrude outward to create this sharp, like a straw poking structure. And when they find their prey, they inject them with this tongue like a straw, which initially paralyzes the animal as the cryptid feeds on it. So in the big scheme of things, I mean, look for these encounters in rural areas, mainly areas with deep cave systems. And I see that these beings, they stay close to their home so they have a place to retreat to easily. They don't want to roam on the surface for any length of time. So yeah, very interesting phenomenon that's going on. And it was cool to get some clarity as to why this is happening, and just pay attention to it and see how these things resonate.
And here's a good question from Anthony. Did she sign up for the military? So did you sign up for this?
For them, no. I had no choice in the matter. It was in my contracts for when I was created. And I don't mean like specifically, oh, I'm going to help humanity born down here, as in the ICC and the Dark Dracos and some of the military had contracts to create me because I'm an experiment. So I did not sign up for this. I did try to sign up for the normal military, but they wouldn't take me.
Okay, and so other than Area 51 for Area 52, what's some other locations that you think you might have been taken to?
I know I have been taken to Camp Livingston, and the Gauntlet is somewhere in Colorado. And that place is pretty much an extensive training ground as well. They take our collars off or our augments shut off for disciplinary, and you can go all out. Well, maybe not all out. Don't collapse the barracks under you, but you know.
And so what did you do at the Gauntlet?
The Gauntlet is basically a huge labyrinth of jail cells, concrete tunnelways, and you have to make your way to the top. If you fail, you will be killed by the creatures that they let out or any other mercenaries that they put in there. And you basically get put into the med beds or regen tanks, depending on the era that it was. And you just wake up, but you don't really get a prize or anything if you make it to the top. They just help your ranking a lot. You know, they see how your cunning is, your abilities advancing, that sort of thing.
And what kind of creatures would they unleash in these labyrinths?
They're after talking with a few people, we're starting to understand a lot of them are just a lot of the hybrid projects that they're either using for warfare off planet or just curious about their performance abilities, really. So whether they have abilities or just their strength, they've seen a lot of weird creatures down there.
Okay. And did you witness any of the other, I'm assuming children were being put through this, not adults?
Yes. Not so much adults. I think the oldest person was maybe 18.
And what was the youngest you think they would put in there?
Maybe between 6 or 7.
Did you witness any of the other children breaking down in absolute fright and failing?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've seen a lot of people get killed in the labyrinth. I mean, I've been killed a couple times. It's not the best of feeling, but you just wake up in a new body, or a regenerated one.
And as far as actually dying, did you experience some kind of near-death experience every time you died?
It's kind of more like a blackout. I mean, I have actually been outside of my body a few times during it, but as soon as they zap you back in, your soul just goes back to your body. So it feels kind of like astral traveling, only on a different dimension. Like everything's a lot wider and a lot more spaced out.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna post this. Not necessarily I agree either way, but maybe you could just comment about that. Since you're being used by these beings that programmed you, how do you know that these memories are your own, or maybe these were part of some kind of matrix, holographic matrix, the reality they put you in? What do you think?
I have actually had both. I have literally been in the programs for a very long time, and at a young age, I have learned to really kind of understand my brainwaves. They try to put the holographic memories in me. We discussed that there is that type of chair that they have implemented. So I can kind of understand the different feelings of frequencies between my actual memories that are organic versus the memories that they actually try to download into you, which is a different frequency. So I have had both, and they have tried. But again, writing everything down, cross-referencing everything with everybody else, it can take years to understand if something's falsified or not. But usually the inorganic memories don't last that long.
All right. Well, can you go back to, do you have enough recall to tell us about some of the beings they put in that labyrinth that killed you or were hunting you?
Oh, you mean the creatures?
Yeah. What did they look like?
I remember very specifically one of them. They were like, they kind of reminded me, okay, I don't really like using references. They're really pasty, like that golem creature from The Hobbit. Like pasty white, just really kind of gangly, but they had claws that were like out to here. They look like some sort of like ET gray ET hybrid. Big black eyes on the front, and they always walked on all fours. very psionic ability, very, very intuitive. Like, they were pretty hard to fight because they kind of like knew what you were going to do before you started doing it. We had just a whole bunch of other, we've had gray ETs in there. We've had, those ones are usually kind of like mercenaries, you know, people who actually participate in the gauntlet to just hunt us down. They have had many other hybrids. There's these little blue guys that look more gray body type for ETs. They can phase through just about anything, so getting away from them is pretty insane. But some of the other ones, there's, let's see.
Did it look like the Tommy Knocker?
No, not really. Like, I'll have to see if I can find anything that's even close to it. Me and my friend were looking up ET species, and we found something very close to it, and it kind of gave us both the chills because they've also been in the gauntlet with me. So we're like, there's like a whole bunch of little reptilian things. I like to name one of them the chupacabra. I don't think it actually is the chupacabra, but it's this little brown kind of gray ET hybrid thing. It's also got like really long claws, but it's also got like the little fangs. They're pretty, I think they're kind of adorable, but they're also very fast on all fours, which is also a pain because they can climb up walls.
And as far as what about the children that were in these labyrinths? Did they ever try to fight back and kill the creatures, or was the goal just to survive?
The goal is literally to survive. You do what you need to do to get to the top. And we usually go in a group about 12 or 15. And sometimes you end up betraying the person next to you. It just depends on the situation. You know, I usually try to go off by myself because I don't really like anyone else following me. You know, I actually met one of the people who I ran the gauntlet with, and I had to apologize to the person because him and I were running next to each other, and this huge behemoth of a creature was chasing us, and I faced through the bars, and they couldn't do that, and I left them behind to get totally crushed. So I felt really bad once I found out that it was actually the person, but, you know,